Yo, 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 yo. It is your boy C-I-double-Z-Y back at it again with another episode of the College Stutzer Show. And we are here with the guests. So if you're watching on camera right now, I know y'all see the beauty. I know y'all see the popping hair. I know y'all see the popping startling t-shirt. I know y'all already know who she is because she pops up in your newsletters and photos randomly last moment. But y'all about to get to know her better. Charlotte Clark, what's up? Say hello to the people.
Hello, friends. Hello.
How are you? How you feeling today?
I'm good.
It was a doozy. I hear on the way here, a little bit of stop and go traffic randomly at 3:00 in the afternoon.
Yeah, I mean it's 71 south north, so I feel like there's always people just doing their own thing.
Now tell me you. I hope you agree with me on this. The fact that there's stoplights on 71 going. That's coming this way, right? Yeah, coming to 39 from, Grandview, that's south. So, so coming this way is the most ridiculous thing on earth, in my opinion. And the reason why is because you'll be like going like 60, then all of a sudden, all these cars slow down super fast because there's random stoplights. I forgot what, is that 63rd or 60, but there's some stoplights.
Yes, there's one on 75th and 63rd, and then the 50 something.
Yeah,
honestly, I'm so used to it by now that like that part of it's not weird. It's the like people who see the flashing lights and like continue to just like
go shoot it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got to be careful out here, ladies and gentlemen. It gets dangerous when you're driving, so make sure you look both ways and smile big at your neighbors because that's what's gonna make sure people don't hit you on the road. So let's jump into it, Miss Charlotte Clark. Startup nerd, self-proclaimed. Startup nerd, puzzling out startup ecosystem innovation. We got some background at MIT, I hear. Let's jump right into it. Let's start at 5 years old. Who was Charlotte Clark at 5 years old? Like, where were you living? Where did you grow up? What were like some of your early hobbies and interests as a kid?
So 5-year-old me, I was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So there's that. I was, I don't even remember what I was doing at 5 years old, honestly, but, I was just starting school. I think pretty early on, my parents realized that I was kind of surpassing other kids. And so I believe there was a little bit of we got to get her into all the advanced classes, and I was going to a private school, so they were not super amenable to that. So 5 to 7 was kind of like a interesting time. But when I was that age, I thought I was going to be a veterinarian because I was obsessed with animals.
Did you have a specific, or just any animal was like you loved it when you saw any animal?
Yeah, I mean, dogs was probably a big one. When I was that young, me and a couple of people I went to school with had this whole ants thing. We were trying to save ants, which is really weird to say out loud and on camera.
It's cute. You were 7.
And sea lions was another big one. We went to the zoo, and there was one, I don't remember what we named it, but named it.
Named it? You named a sea lion at the zoo?
Yeah.
Did you ever go back and remember the sea lion?
I believe I did go back. But they all look the same. I feel like when you're younger, everything's distorted. So when you go back, you're older, you're like, did that even happen?
Right,
so
yeah.
I don't recall if I saw the sea lion again, but so I really thought I was gonna be a veterinarian. Pretty early on, I was into computers. We had a Mac at home, and
the initial ones,
the really really early ones that were this big.
Mm-hmm.
And my parents would buy me educational CDs.
Yeah.
So one of them was me pretending to be a veterinarian, and it, immediately it was this is not for me. The game was emergency veterinarian medicine, and I had to do surgery on a cat, and I panicked, and the cat died. So that was the end of me thinking I could be a vet.
Hold up. Let's pause right there. I know, ladies and gentlemen, y'all like, I thought this was a business podcast. Shut up and listen real quick. So you trying to tell me that there was a CD that you could input into the Apple computer that was supposed to simulate a career as a veterinarian, and they allowed cats to die?
I mean,
I mean, obviously, I know it was probably not gory or anything like that.
Right.
But I'm just saying, like, if a 7-year-old, I'd be traumatized.
I mean, this was like the end of my vet career as it standed. So I don't know that it died per se, but I do know that I do remember very vividly that I panicked, that I like couldn't do anything, like knowing that I had to like cut the animal open. So then it was like kind of excluded all medical fields from that point. So for a while there, I really thought I was going to be a vet, and I don't think I had a backup plan when all of that fell through. So, yeah, that was where I was at. I was like obsessed with Powerpuff Girls. That was like my all-time favorite TV show. Also Pokemon was like also very obsessed with that.
I love it.
We made up our own set of Pokemon, called it something different.
Hashtag creativity.
Yeah, which is kind of absurd to think about it now, because Pokemon now has like thousands and thousands of like made up animals. So then to think that like we were younger and we were having a hard time coming up with our own, like 100.
Absolutely.
But yeah, that's kind of what I was doing around that age.
I love it. Let's talk a little bit more about Pittsburgh. So how many years did you spend in Pittsburgh, and what are some of like your earliest memories of Pittsburgh in regards to the city itself? Maybe it was a certain type of food that was popular there, or maybe it was something in the culture that was popular there, or a building, anything that you can remember from like just the early days in Pittsburgh, and how long, and obviously how old you were when you left.
Yeah, so I was, I lived there all throughout elementary, middle school, high school. Earliest memories, I don't even, to have to think that far back is so hard.
Like 16-year-old, I'll make it like a little bit more direct question. So like 16, 17-year-old Charlotte, like you're kicking it with your friends. It's freshman, sophomore year. Where are you hanging out at? Like what was the spot for high schoolers in whatever year that was?
Yeah. So high school, frozen yogurt, I think, was just coming in. So ate a lot of that. I was on the rowing team in school.
Like on the river rowing?
Yeah. So
wow.
Pittsburgh, unlike Kansas City, people actually do things on the river. So we were, doing the rowing and the boat. And
is that on a major river, like, or is it like a small river that you guys?
No, they're major. So Pittsburgh has 3. The Allegheny is one of the major ones, and I've now blanked on the other 2 as I've said this. But yeah, we were on some of the main ones. People are coming back with their, the wake of their boats, and barges are going by you, and you just gotta have to like sit and wait. But those probably some of the better memories I had, was being on the team and just like being on the water, and like learning kind of how to do crew, and just like watching movies with friends. Probably 16, 15, I went to a pre-college program at Carnegie Mellon, which yes, sorry.
So Carnegie Mellon, yo, we got a legend in the building in terms of intellectual. Well, from my perspective, see, you got to remember, ladies and gentlemen, you have to remember that my experience growing up was simply just the schools in my area, and like none of the older kids that I knew. So I have 8 older brothers and sisters, and none of them, except for maybe my oldest sister, and then like none of my siblings' friends went to any notable school, let's say. Okay. So none really went to even the small notable school, not small, but maybe not so what would you call like MIT or Yale? What are those schools called? Like prestigious, that's the word I'm looking for. So none of them really went to prestigious schools. None of them even went to KU or MU. They all went to like super small colleges, random towns. So anytime I connect with somebody who's gone to a prestigious school, one could say or mention something that it seems more like out of a movie to me. So sorry for my like intense reactions to some of these things.
No
but
worries.
Like for me, it's like still, even though I've met now, being older, met a lot of people that have gone to Yale and such, like it's still just like, oh my God, we got a legend. Like it feels very celebrity-esque in my brain again. So that's just me. So I apologize for the intense reaction.
No worries.
But tell me about that. Continue on your story. Just had to give my little background on that.
Yeah. So I did a program in 2008 called SAMS. So shout out to anybody who was in the SAMS program. And that was kind of an interesting time. I was in high school. I was having trouble socially. I had switched in middle school, I'd switched to a public school, and then I'd switched back to a private school through half of middle school into high school. And who knows, puberty, whatever, just having a hard time socially. And so 2008 was like a really pivotal year for me because I went to this college program, and it was like a science and math, like 8 to 10 week program. I met one of my really good friends there who happened to then transfer to the high school I went to. But it was just really interesting to be around a lot of other Black and brown students who were also there for the summer. We had really awesome, college students who are like our mentors. And it was just like tons of fun, just like met a lot of really great people there. And it was just kind of an interesting place to like realize that like I kind of fit in there, being nerdy, being like really intense about school, and being around a lot of other people who also felt that same way and were interested in math and science. So it was like a really great program. I have met other people like outside of Pittsburgh who had gone, and so that's always like a really interesting, like, oh my God, and then you talk about the counselors you had and the people you knew, and so that was probably one of the more pivotal moments. I don't think up until that point I had thought about going to CMU, but it was definitely one of the schools that I was like, well, if I did get in here, this would be, like an okay place to go.
Yeah, I love that. And so when you were, you mentioned as a kid you liked computers, and you guys had an Apple computer in the house, which I noticed when I talked to a lot of people that are a little bit older than me who like remember that really, really well. I remember it kind of well because my dad was a computer teacher, so we did have a lot of computers around us. So I do remember those kind of a little bit wider than probably what you're talking about, but super boxy ones. And I remember the button there and stuff like that. So I remember those. But, a lot of people who got introduced to Apple early on really got into tech or software development or coding. So, like, was that the same thing for you when you're like 17, 18, you're into the math and sciences, but did that include like computer programming and things of that nature? And can you talk a little bit more about like the specific interests in math and science or computers that you started involving yourself in when you're like 18, 17?
Yeah, I'll say that prior to that, like 4th, 5th grade, I was part of the first robotics for a year or so. I took a couple of like coding type classes way before then as well, though they were not titled computer science, were not titled coding. So was definitely still doing that. And then beginning of high school as well was just like really helpful on people who didn't know how to use their computers. So like clicking things and issues, troubleshooting issues, just was kind of randomly doing that. So 17, 18, it still hadn't fully clicked that like tech was a thing I could be doing, even though it was consistently something that I had been doing most of my school life. So about 17, when you're thinking about colleges, I was either going to go down the languages route because I was really good at French and had been doing French and Spanish throughout high school, and then was also thinking about doing engineering. So the SAMS program I was in took like a electrical engineering course, really loved it, and so I was thinking about doing that and doing robotics. So I still had not completely figured out which way I was going to major, but I had basically like thought through applying to a few liberal arts schools and then a few of like technology focused schools. But really, it was kind of like a coin toss of like which one I was going to go with at that point. It hadn't fully clicked until I think I started applying and then started to get into schools.
I love it. And so talk about like you open the letter, you get the email for the school you end up going to. What was that experience like? And then let's kind of jump into your collegiate experience, what you studied, and some things you enjoyed or didn't enjoy, just to like really help the guests understand, or new guests who are listening to this podcast because of Charlotte, and y'all like, I like Charlotte, let me listen to this. This show is really, yes, it's a business show, but we really try to learn more about the guests who come on here. So forgive me for asking so many questions about you. I just really want to understand like the framework, the foundation that brought you to where you are today, and kind of like how you ended up doing what you're doing right now. So with that being said, share that initial experience when that letter or email or call came in.
Yeah, I believe it was an email. MIT admissions gives regular admissions the same day and time every year. So it's on Pi Day, so March 14th. I was convinced I wasn't going to get in, so was just kind of like waiting for the hammer to drop. But getting the email was like a shock. I remember screaming and crying, and my younger sister was like, "Why are you being so dramatic?" And I believe I like had called my dad and was just like, "I got in." And there was like a little bit of a pause between when I got the email and when I got financial aid. So there was like a period of time where it was like unclear that I was going to commit to going,
right.
Which was also really awkward because I had told all the people I went to school with that I had gotten in, but I like couldn't like officially commit. But thankfully financial aid came through, and then I was able to officially say I was going. So that was just like a whole shock. There was really no decision at that point. I feel like you get into MIT, you can't be like, "Oh, sorry." Like, I don't want to go anymore.
Loyola.
Like, thanks, no thanks.
Be coming tomorrow. Right, yeah.
Yeah, so that kind of made the decision for me. But yeah, it was just pretty exciting. They have a campus preview weekend for all the admitted students to come and hang out. That was cool. It was interesting because you think about MIT being super intense, everyone's studying and like heads down. And coming to that weekend, everyone was like, "No, we all have fun. Like, it's cool here. Like nobody's like freaking out about studying." Which, on the flip side of that, being in school and having to like do that for the or the people coming in to be freshmen every year was like, we gotta lie to them. So that was definitely really exciting to be able to get in and then commit to, doing robotics at engineering or at MIT at the time that I had gotten accepted.
Absolutely. That's amazing. And for those who don't know, where is MIT located?
Yeah, it's in Boston, Massachusetts. It is, the campus is right by the river, Charles River. Yeah, it's extremely cold there in the winter and extremely hot there in the summers. But I also had family in Massachusetts, so I'd been there once or twice a year every year.
Nice, you had some familiarity.
Yeah, so there was some familiarity being in Massachusetts, but yeah, it's a great environment outside of the fact that the school's there.
And I also heard that in Boston, it's like one of those cities that is like most populated with universities and colleges in like such a central area. So what was that experience like? Were you guys kicking it with other students from other schools? Were you guys like connecting and collaborating at all, like MIT students? And I mean specifically in like educational stuff, like was MIT collaborating with other schools or doing, especially in robotics, like programs together?
I guess a little. Harvard is very, very close to where MIT is. MIT has a slight rivalry with Harvard. I don't know that Harvard feels the same way, but there was the ability to kind of take classes at Harvard. Same thing for Harvard. They were able to take classes at MIT. Probably not as collaborative as far as like colleges go, but definitely it's true. Northeastern was like across the way. definitely kind of ran into Boston College students and other college students there as well. But I think because MIT is like such a unique place to go to school, there was not like a lot of like, oh, I'm gonna just hop over to Northeastern and just like hang out there. So at least in my perspective, there was probably a limited view of that type of like inner school collaboration.
I love it. I love it. And what did you end up graduating from MIT with?
Computer science. So midway through, beginning of the time I joined, I thought I was going to be double majoring in electrical engineering, computer science. Midway through, I was avoiding taking electrical engineering classes. So at that point, it made the most sense to switch. And then, I graduated with a computer science degree.
I love it. So what year was that, by the way?
2014.
So 2014, you graduate with a degree in computer science from MIT. You're in Boston. It's like May. You're finishing up graduation. Like, what's on your brain? What are you going to do next? Like, why the hell are you in Kansas City? Respectfully.
No, I mean, it's cool.
Yeah, like let's talk about it.
Yeah, graduating, I was highly stressed out. I was very anxious. The way that my last year had gone was a little bit different, I think, than most of the other seniors I was graduating with, because I think a lot of people had taken the right senior classes, and like spring semester, they were like, whatever, I've gotten a job. A lot of people also, junior into senior year, had gotten internships, and then they had gotten letters of commitment, so they were already like, I've got a job, whatever. I didn't have a job coming out of my junior summer. I was still taking classes that counted towards me graduating the spring semester, so I was very anxious, and definitely had to like make a conscious mental decision to just like live my own life, knowing that it felt very much like everyone else around me was doing a completely different thing than I was. And so I had to really be like, okay, we are really just focusing on graduating, and then we will take a couple months break, and then we will think about, applying to jobs. So there was definitely a peer pressure kind of like still trying to apply to jobs as I was still, doing classes. And so as I was graduating, I was very much like, I'm going to go home. I was panicked that I would be at home for like 2 months and just like live there for the rest of my life, which thankfully did not end up happening, but was very much intentional about how I wanted to continue post-graduation into getting a job and then, starting the rest of your life.
Absolutely. I love that. And so what's like, I could be wrong, but I sense this feeling that you did not love Pittsburgh.
Oh, yeah, no. I'm not supposed to talk bad about anything on here. So I will say that Pittsburgh is a uniquely unique place to live. And though I have friends and family that live there, it is really hard for me to go back and like hang out and it be like cool. It is just not the place that I am excited to like be back in.
Okay. That makes sense. Are you comfortable diving into that deep, or would you like to jump?
I'm pretty much an open book about it.
Awesome. Let's jump into it.
Yeah, I mean, I think growing up was just like hard. So like coming back to Pittsburgh is not as, I don't know. I feel like if people had like the quintessential like high school experience, then like coming back to where you had all of those memories would be different. So there's that. But I think the other big piece is that Pittsburgh is kind of an outdated city. So even when I was there, people would always talk about how Pittsburgh was like almost like 20 years in the past, whereas everywhere else was like in the future. So there's definitely some like still some underlying like racism, and it is not the best place for Black people to live and to like try to be successful. There's tons of people I know that are, doing their things there, but just like coming back feels as if I'm like aging backwards in a sense. So yeah, it's just interesting coming back and seeing parts of the city that were super lively when I was younger, being very much like kind of ghost town like. There's a lot of gentrification.
You're giving me like Detroit vibe. Although again, I'm sure like many people would say probably about Pittsburgh for people who are like super big Pittsburgh fans or something like that. But for like Detroit, you know, people be like, oh, Detroit's coming back. But still, like when you have deep conversations with people about Detroit, it's like very much quote unquote, they'll say it's a dead city and it's little by little coming back. Would you say it's a similar vibe in terms of the energy and the air about Detroit over the past?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to talk bad about it per se, because I think that I have a skewed perspective. I will say though that like downtown and very much the places where a lot of tech companies have come in and built their offices, it looks like any other city. But then you go outside of that and it is very like, oh, all of that closed and all of this closed. So there's definitely, I feel like there's probably a lot of cities like that that feel like two different sides. Absolutely. Depending on like what job you have or what part of the city you're living in. And I have not been to Detroit, so I can't
speak on that
fully compare it to it. But yeah, it's definitely really interesting coming back and seeing how things have thrived in some parts of the city and how things have not thrived, I guess, in the other parts of the city.
And so how did the transition to Kansas City happen, and in what year? Like, what's the story behind how you ended up in the 816/913?
Yeah, I got recruited from a woman who worked at Cerner. I was in the summer of 2014 just looking at jobs. And she was like, hey, like, you'd be a great fit. So I started the interviewing process and then officially got the job September of 2014. Hadn't heard of Kansas City prior to that. Had no idea that this place existed. And I was also supposed to fly here for an interview, but ended up like the flight had issues and it got canceled. So I honestly hadn't been here until after I accepted the job.
Wow.
But yeah, so that's definitely the reason why I decided to relocate everything over here. But within a year of moving, I was like, oh, like of all the places I didn't know existed and like had never gone to and then, you know, moved to, like this was a pretty good random choice.
I love it. I'm going to give you a few seconds to grab a sip of your drink and enjoy that while I turn to the camera and I say, shout out to Equal Minded Cafe for providing the space today. Make sure you guys tap in. We are here on 4327 or 4337. Either way, you can Google it. Troost Avenue in Kansas City, Missouri. Tap in. They got good foods, good snacks. Shout out my guy, Don Tavius. He's been on the show, so go check that episode out. Now back to regular scheduled programming. And that's what we call the ratchet sponsor. You know what I'm saying? We don't do cuts. We do it the real authentic way. Anyways, I'm joking. Shout out to all your podcasts that are fly with the Fly Podcast sponsorships and all that good stuff. So your first apartment in Kansas City, where was it? What was that like? You get your first apartment. How did you like the neighborhood? How did you feel? What was the vibes? Let's talk about it.
Yeah, as I was relocating here, I assumed that like downtown was the place to live. So when my mom and I drove here from Pittsburgh a couple of times. No, once. We drove here once and then I had flown here and I just had literally stayed in the downtown area because I just assumed that that's where everything was. Right. So my first apartment was 910 Pennsylvania Avenue. Other than that, what do I say?
Like, what was the first place you ate at? My bad. I can ask more specific questions.
Yeah,
I got you. Yeah, like what was like the first place you ate at? What was like the first thing that was like the most consistent? Like, for example, I moved to LA and my first thing when I got to LA was this job I got was right next to a burrito shop. And I used to go to the burrito shop every day after work and get me like a burrito and talk to the guy in the back. That was like my routine. So like, what was like a routine or an initial place you always went to? It could be a bar, it could be a food place, it could be a movie theater.
Yeah, I don't know that I had any of that per se. I think I had flown in about a week before I started at Cerner. Had just like set up all my stuff. It took like 3 days for my internet to get in, so I was like holed up in the apartment for a couple of days. I don't really remember if I was exploring too much. I had gone to Target a few times. Was still trying to like get the feel of like where everything was, and like I think I was probably going to Kansas or like places just like way the far out, because that's where I assumed things were at. But you know, Cerner has their own cafe, so that was probably consistently
they got
where I was eating, other than like cooking my own food. But the first, even before I had gotten here, I was looking at like meetup.com, and I was trying to find groups. And so KC Ladies Social Society was the one that I had like started to RSVP to things before I had even shown up there. So that was probably very early on the most consistent part of my like new Kansas City life that I was a part of, other than, you know, working at Cerner.
Absolutely. So I want to go ahead and talk to you about, you know, the past few months, what you've been involved in, what some of your interests, your hobbies are. And so with that being said, the specific question I'm going to ask there, I got you. What's the biggest surprise you've had in the last few months? And, you know, why was it a surprise? Or, you know, it can be an exciting thing, it can be a sad thing, it can be whatever you want it to be. But when you think about your hobbies, your interests, your career right now, like what's the biggest surprise that's happened in the past few months?
Yeah, probably the biggest shock that should not be a shock is how many people know of me, and then I meet them and they're like, hey, like huge fan of you. And I'm just like, of what exactly? And they're like, no, everything you've done. And then I'm just like, and I think part of that is for the last year and a half, I've been doing a lot of things, and it hasn't all been like flashy. I haven't been like, here's what I'm doing, like, you know, like trying to push all of it out. And so I've been very much working, or what I thought, working in the background of a lot of things. And so there's been a consistent number of people who have had the same reaction, that I'm like, okay, clearly I am no longer working in the background of anything. People are very much aware of the work that I'm doing. And they're like able to recognize that I am doing the work, and that it kind of aligns with who I'm trying to be as a person. And so within the last couple of weeks, it's definitely been like, okay, this is definitely not something that's going away. I've had at least a handful of people consistently say this to me. So at this point, I'm trying to be a little bit more like accepting of that versus being like, is that a joke? Like,
right.
Can you give me specifics? So that's been definitely the bigger shock that is really trying to make me reconsider how I kind of move in the future.
I love it. Well, I think that's worth congratulating personally. So congratulations. Say it louder, y'all. Come on now. All right, there we go. Gotcha. So before I ask the next question, I want to ask, in terms of the exciting things you've been doing that have obviously drawn attention, what has been maybe one or two of the projects that you are most excited about, whether it's something you've already done or something that's rolling out, like if you're allowed to share, of course, anything. Yeah, what are like one or two projects that you've been most excited about that you've completed or been a part of over the past, let's just say 2022?
Yeah, I think the thing that I'm currently working on that when I got the job offer was like the most amazing offer is working in UMKC's Innovation Center. For those of you that don't know, the Innovation Center is what I like to call the like entrepreneurial hub of Kansas City. And to be part of that hub, to be working with startups like from that central point for the last 6 months at this point is just like crazy. But it's also really, really interesting to kind of be behind the scenes, like under the hood of some of that stuff, and being able to provide my own expertise and knowledge in that space, but also gaining a lot of insight as to what the Kansas City ecosystem, how it works, and how it's moving a lot of different parts, and just sort of being one of those cogs that is kind of helping create change in Kansas City, specifically for startup founders, is pretty epic.
Yeah, and that's super impactful. I think people often forget. They kind of look at startups, or just aren't. Well, I want to say startups. They kind of look at startups as like, a friend had a startup, and they're like, oh, it's one of two things. Oh, that's super cool, and it's kind of like this thing external, like of most people's lives who are just going about their life, which is fine, whatever they're doing. No disrespect to anybody. Sorry, but it's kind of like that for some people, and then on the other side, it's kind of like, oh my gosh, like that's like, like watching TV or something, a startup. Anytime people hear startup, I'm saying there's different perspectives people have. So my question is, what is like your role at the Innovation Center, and like how you're interacting with the startups? Like, what does that look like? What are on a technical basis? Are you like sitting down people and talking to them about their financials, or how to set up it could be so many things. So
yeah.
What does that look like for you in your day to day?
Yeah, so I'm currently part of the Tech Venture Studio department, which is the specific startup department in the Innovation Center. And I'm one of the project coordinators, specifically helping around Comeback KC, which is a program that is backed by an Eda Grant, started June of 2021, and has an 18-month sprint. So it'll end this year. But when I was brought on, it was really because they didn't have someone designated to like work on all of the deliverables and all of the metrics that they kind of wrote in the grant. It was like they needed someone to kind of help to implement and to push that forward. So that's the work that I have been doing. That is basically trying to keep all the balls from being dropped. Prior to now-ish, we've kind of hit the numbers of fellows we need, which are all entrepreneurs and technologies within Kansas City that are building tech-enabled businesses that are specifically solving problems born out of the pandemic. But prior to this summer was, trying to find those people and providing that like intake process, and then has also been trying to find advisors and other people that can help meet with them strategically once a month, doing a lot of that coordination. And then some of it has just been like process. So I'm in a lot of meetings. There's a lot of brainstorming and tasks that are like, oh, this needs to be done, and we've got to do this. And so it's just been like listing all of that and trying to get a few of those things done every day. Summer in the Sand is a related program to Digital Sandbox, which is one of probably the more famous programs coming out of Tech Venture Studio. And so Digital Sandbox provides $20K of funding to founders as they build prototypes. And then Summer in the Sand is kind of the summer program for some of those people who have either pitched or have been awarded. And so I'm also working on a product development bootcamp, very specifically for founders who, get the funding and then are just trying to find that partner and like how do they stay involved. So it still kind of brings in some of my engineering and product management background, and the ability to kind of be in the ecosystem, to then be very, very focused on product development. But then a lot of the other things are just coordinating fellows, coordinating advisors, coordinating people who, need something or are looking for something, and just making sure that all of the things that are active and at play continue to be active and at play.
Continue circulating and
Yes.
moving. I love that. And side note, what do you call it? Cliff note. What is the Eda Grant? Like, what does that mean?
I don't know exactly, but it's a federal grant, and the type of grant is that it is instead of it being like 5 years or something like that, it's 18 months. So it's very much like in this 18-month period, like we need you to get from point A to point B. So that is really the funding source, I believe. Yeah. Do not quote me on this. This is just what I have heard multiple times. And it's a lot of things that people have asked over and over again. But yeah, the funding is very much for just a very specific 18-month period of time, getting about 20 entrepreneurs into the program, getting them from point A to point B and set metrics. And that's the funding that is really pushing all of this forward.
And what did that intake process, or I guess technically recruitment process, look like in terms of finding those 20 entrepreneurs? Was it like just putting an application online and pushing it across socials and then entrepreneurs just sending an application, or are y'all out there like dead ass recruiting?
Yeah, it was a little bit of both. Definitely trying to push it in newsletters and in social media and press releases, trying to get it out there. There was also last summer a couple of sessions where they brought in key entrepreneurs and key ecosystem people into one space for like an hour and a half. And it was just like brainstorm all of the entrepreneurs you know that are doing stuff in the education space or doing stuff in the healthcare space. So I believe that's kind of how they got their first initial people, which I was also part of one of those sessions, although I did not know exactly what that was for at the time. And then a lot of it has been kind of going through existing SBDC clients who have tech businesses, and their tech counselors being able to kind of identify that, like, you know, whatever their business is, whenever they started it, how does it have a COVID focus, and then kind of bring them into the fold. So, yeah, it's been a lot of active work. We've also found a few people who, you know, had COVID-related businesses but might not have bridged that tech gap just yet. So we definitely did have a lot of discussions about, like, how do we find people who are just on the cusp of becoming a startup founder, and how do we start to bring those people in the fold versus, you know, trying to find people who have existing businesses who might not have a code angle or might have a tech angle. But how do we find people who are kind of on the outskirts of some of that peripheral understanding and still bring them in and provide the right resources to them?
I love it. I love it. So you play a part in a lot, is what it sounds like. And so there's a lot of roles that you play inside of the work you do. So what, I guess, character traits or qualities do you have to build, or have you had to build, in order to maintain and stay on top of the roles and be the best at what you do? So what are, like, I don't know if that's the same thing, but qualities, characteristics that you've had to acquire or hone to be able to help you in that process over the past 6 months?
Yeah, I will say that probably the biggest one is the problem solving, but that's something I've always been doing. So I think it's just gone into hyperdrive in the space that I'm in. Yeah. The role with UMKC is one of the 4 or 5 things I'm doing. We'll just brush past it. We don't have to talk about it. So it's definitely been a lot of problem solving, a lot of time management, and really understanding, like, what needs to be done now and what can I push till next week or from 2 or 3 days. I will say that I have a super flexible, like, hour schedule, so that kind of allows more freedom, which is great, and is also kind of a con because there is no set
accountability aspect.
Yeah, so there's definitely a level of, like, time management, prioritization, and then just part of it, I think, is being a product manager and thinking about how things work, and, like, what if it doesn't work, like, how do I fix it? So it's been a lot of, like, iterative thinking, an iterative process of, like, okay, well, that week didn't go as well, like, what had gone wrong, what do I need to do? So there's, like, a consistent, almost kind of like startups in themselves, consistent thinking of, that tool didn't work for me, do I use this tool? I spent way too much time on that. Like, how do I change that? How do I make sure that my hours make sense? So problem solving and, like, the iterative understanding of improvement. Yeah. And then the time management is a big one.
So when you think about time allocation and problem solving, the standard business podcast question I have to ask is, are there any books or blogs or social media content YouTubers that you follow in order to just kind of get a spark, or maybe out of this 10-minute video grab something that helps you? And if so, who are those individuals or what are those books?
I will always recommend the Lean Startup. Not only did it change kind of how I thought about startups in the ecosystem when I was a consultant and I was working with founders one-on-one, but I think it continues to be a really great resource thinking about how to just like approach life. Yeah. The other book would be, it is now escaped me. I think it's Designing Your Life. I don't remember the author right off the top of my head. But that has probably been the biggest book that was kind of reinforced what I was already kind of doing, which was thinking about what I like doing, thinking about how I like doing it, and basically finding a way to kind of craft the roles and the things I was doing into that space. But it was really helpful to know that like other people were reading something similar, and we're trying to find ways to best, make that path work for them. But yeah, I think those would be the two. Anything else is really, I'm just part of a lot of Facebook and Slack groups. Yeah. And so when resources pop up that look anything relatedly interesting to product management and startups, I'll click it and give it a read. So I don't know that any like consistent authors or anything comes to mind, but I'm just like always like trying to figure out what to learn from and what is already kind of out there. And usually it provides some really interesting articles that I wouldn't have already like just found on my own.
And that stimulates this other question of this word that I just learned. So excuse the language, ladies and gentlemen, but our phrase, mental masturbation, engaging in intellectually stimulating conversation with little or no practical purpose. Do you struggle with that by chance? I just wondering, how do you work through that? I only ask because a lot of people in the business sector, especially startup founders or people who strive to be startup founders, have so much and I'm guilty of this for sure. So much content on YouTube, so much business content on TikTok of like these quick hits of how to close your next sale, how to do this, and just so much information that you're inundated with. Or the Lean Startup, there's like a website called that too. I don't know if that's what you're referring to, or the book, but
the book, yeah.
But I used to go on that website and it just has some good stories and about this business and how they broke it down, and you just are reading it, and then it's like 6 months later you ain't done shit. So I'm wondering, do you struggle with that, or have you struggled with that? And whether you have or have not, do you have any suggestions to people who do on how to overcome potentially?
Yeah, I mean, maybe a little bit. I guess I had never heard of that term before. I'd say probably for me, I know that I kind of work in ebbs and flows of inspiration. So for me, it is, I need that like consistent spark of like, oh, that is so cool. Like, let me think on that. But that also pairs with like a level of like writing things down. Yeah. So I think I guess the advice I would give is that if that is part of what your process is, like taking that and kind of taking one step further, instead of it just being like, oh, you're reading it, you're consuming it, like thinking about how you can kind of apply that to what you're doing or what you think you might be doing, or that idea that you just haven't started yet. Just like write what it is down. I kind of do have like shiny object syndrome when it comes to ideas and like cool things to implement. So there is really no, I don't think, solution for that. But what I do like to do is just like write it all down, and like at some point I'll come back to it maybe. But I think just like allowing my brain at least to like think through it and think of possibilities and think about how to implement it. While it might not be something that I implement right then and there, I think the exercise of like thinking through it and providing more insight to it is just helpful.
Absolutely.
Because at least from what I've found is like I'll do that a little bit, and it might not even be relevant to what I'm doing, but I might talk to someone a week later, and it's so creepily relevant to what they're doing.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, hey, I read this thing. I'll send you the article, and like, this is what I kind of came from it. So it is an unintentional, like, great networking tool.
Yeah, for
so
sure.
I think as long as it stays within the realm of like whatever you're passionate about, like, it can't hurt.
I love that. And to expound upon that, just from my perspective, like, you made me think about the fact that I like read a lot of content, I watch a lot of content, but I definitely do my best to notate a lot of the information that I learn. And it comes in handy from three different points. Not at immediately. That's the one thing that can be challenging. Is like, I want this to help now, but it's like, it might not come in handy for 6 months.
Yeah.
So number one is exactly what you just said, networking tool, like being able to understand certain topics, or understand the foundation, or understand, especially, I talked to Naeem, he was a gentleman, he doesn't work there, but he was down there with the white hoodie, but I've talked to him in the past about, he has such great vocabulary, and he knows so many business terms, he knows so many terms, and to be able to understand the vocabulary of business, the communication, the wording around business can help you so much. Like, I went to an event the other day, a Startland event, and there was a VC there, and I don't have a company or anything, but I just was talking to him, and I just knew what he was saying because I watched enough YouTube videos about certain things, and I write it down. So I'm like, oh, I know that term. Oh, I know that. And then it can help with follow-up questions. Now, this is a stimulating conversation between the two. So in the future, that might be somebody I connect with. He's like, oh, yeah, I had a good conversation with them. But if you have no idea about these things, then you just over here blank as hell in these conversations, not knowing what's going on. So definitely hear you on that. Number two, this isn't like super valuable, but can be valuable at times, is like having so many notes on so many videos you watched can kind of help stimulate content that you can share on Twitter or videos or something like that. There's so many notes in my phone that just are a random quote. Marketing is not about, manipulating somebody into buying a product. About it is about helping them feel whatever, something. I'll read that and I'm like, video, or little Twitter something, and then somebody retweets it, and now it's an engaging conversation. So that's another win there. I can't remember the third one, so but I did want to ask you, you've been a business consultant, you still technically are, in my opinion. You're obviously working in an amazing space where you're around so many startups. Do you believe there is some sort of formula or process that one can follow to have a potentially successful business? Or do you think there's maybe character traits that are absolutely mandatory? That's a two-part question. You can choose which one you want to answer.
I'm going to answer both. I think that there is, yes. There's definitely character traits that will make you a great founder, and there is a process that takes your idea to a viable business concept. That is actually something I'm actively working on right now. I think that the hardest part of like saying yes to those things is that it consistently varies for every single person. So like what makes me an entrepreneur might not resonate with another person who is an entrepreneur, but we might have hopefully we have similar traits and similar processes we've gone through. And that's been a really interesting conceptual thing in my brain, is like how to best articulate and create content that brings any sort of person into that. And really provide that like space for them to be able to be like, okay, I could do this. Here's my idea. And now it's a concept, and now it's a business. And so I think that there's some of that content out there in the World Wide Web there's a lot, and it's overwhelming, and it might not also like work for people. Yeah. But I think that there is a way to kind of boil it down, and there is a process that does get a person from wherever they're at to wherever they end. I will also say that I think the biggest thing is that confidence. I feel like a lot of people I talk to who are especially non-technical don't believe that they can create a business that is branched out of software because they don't code, which is like completely, entirely untrue. And I think that part of that, like, oh, I don't code, so I don't know what I'm doing thing, I think permeates through that process and can make it really, really hard versus it being like, I don't know how to code, but like, I'm going to make this product and I'm going to find a different way to do this. And having that like maneuverability around startups is probably one of the single most important pieces. So that is probably one of the bigger traits, I would say, is just part of that. I think is just the education around it.
Yeah.
What is actually tech? I've had a conversation in socials with this before, and it's also just been something I've thought about a lot, is that like the concept of tech and the concept of tech startups is not like your ability to code or the software. It's like, what process are you automating? And we're automating processes all day long, whether or not you can code or you can't. And so to really like rethink about like, how do I automate my life, or how do I automate a solution to a person's problem? That's going to be the like critical step from like, oh, I can't code, I can't be a founder, to I have this great idea, how am I going to execute it?
I love it. Run that back. The past 7 minutes, 6 minutes. Run that back. Listen to it again. Save it in your audio file. Okay. So I just have a few more questions for you. I want to say first and foremost that I appreciate you making time today. For real. I know you're busy. I know humans are busy. We got to go get it, and especially in the entrepreneurship world and business sector. There's more than 40 things going on at once, and trying to, like you said, time allocation and figuring out where, time should be valued and such, that I appreciate you considering me in that time space. So that didn't make no sense, but thank you. Thank you for showing up today is what I was trying to say. So this is a question I ask all of my guests, and I'm asking it early. And the question is, it's your last day on earth. You're 110 years old. You've lived a life that's full of, that you're grateful about. You've done everything you've wanted to do. You've made your mark. But your great-great-great-great-grandkids, imagine you live that long, are sitting at your feet, and they ask you, great-great-great-great-grandma, what is one piece of advice on how to live a good life? What are you going to tell them?
I probably would say like accept yourself for who you are. Is probably the like biggest thing that I've had to learn myself. Is that I think as humans, and especially as humans who are constantly on technology and on social media, that we're expecting that our life should be a certain way, instead of it just being the way that it is. So I think that that's been the biggest thing I've had to learn, and it's one of my resolutions for 2022 is to stop. And the biggest thing is the should word. My sister, shout out to my sister for telling this to me, and then it took me a few months, and then it like fully like washed through me. But like, saying that like I should be doing this, I should be doing that is like kind of detrimental to you being able to kind of progress. And instead of like trying to always strive for like what is the stereotypical way to do something, like meet yourself where you're at and just be like, okay, like I should be doing it this way, but I don't. So like, how do I, continue to live and exist and be happy in where I'm at right now?
I love it.
So yeah, that would probably be the advice I would give, as I'm old and maybe a little delusional and rambling. And yeah, hopefully that all of my great grandkids have learned that and can take that with them.
I love it. This is what we're going to call the speed round. So essentially I'm going to ask you 4 to 5 questions. Just give a, quick answer is what I'm going to say. I'm not going to say a one-word answer that makes things difficult. So okay. Quick answers. So one founder you admire in the Kansas City metro area.
Janae Gamage.
2, one founder you look up to in the entire just startup world that you've like looked up to the past few years.
Oh, that is a lot of pressure. I'm going to say Donald Hawkins.
Number 3, would you rather be wealthy or impactful?
Impactful.
Number 4, what is a KPI that you're going to look at to decide if a business is good or not, like, or is doing well or not. An indicator, whether it's profit margin or the product itself. Like, what's one thing where you're like looking at a sheet and you're just like, all right, this is a good company?
I don't know how to explain this, but
That's
I can
okay. You can
see
give a
it
longer
in
answer.
my visual eye. For me, it really comes down to problem workflow to solution workflow. I don't know how to explain that in a short answer, other than the focus of it being very much on the problem. What is the problem process that is painful? And how does the solution workflow directly aid in making that process better?
I love it. Side note, I think you should create like a cool ass flow chart, like a little draw something like basically what you just explained, but turn it into a drawing. I feel like, not that this is the purpose you should do it for providing value, but I feel like it would go viral on business Twitter. Anyways, final question. What is one question business owners or startup founders are not asking that would help their business today if they asked it?
How do I become the product manager and the CEO of my startup?
I love it. Well, Charlotte Clark, thank you so much for making some time for me today. This has been a fun conversation. I always tell guests that I enjoy it with. I'm like, hey, not to say that I didn't enjoy other episodes, but anyways, if I enjoyed it, I'm like, yo, we're going to have to come back for a part 2. So definitely I would love to, check back in with you in another 6 months, see how things have been going, and continue this conversation around how your life is, unfolding, and then also about business, of course, because business is just so fun to talk about, in my opinion. So
yes, definitely.
thank you so much. Is there anything or anyone you'd like to shout out or plug before we sign out of here today? It can be your websites, your platform, something you're doing, or it could be a friend, anything.
We're going to go friends because I don't like talking about myself, even though we've done it for an hour. Nasir Chris, my favorite human. He's a VC. He works at 68 Capital currently. Definitely impactful in Kansas City. He's leaving very soon, which is sad for me, but he's doing great things. So if you're going to follow me, you should just also give him a follow.
I love it. And because she said that, Nasir, I'm coming to your inbox soon. Podcast invite. Keep your eye out, young blood. All right. With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to turn to the camera. It's your boy, CIZZY. Thank you guys for tapping in for another episode of the College Stutzer Show. I plan on coming back and bringing the most fire guests like I did today, continuously and consistently. And with that being said, we out.